It begins with a single line scratched into the wood of an abandoned farmhouse. 4 daughters, 4 graves, do not look deeper. The year was 1837, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, a quiet farmland community defined by its proud German roots, its devotion to church, and its unspoken fear of outsiders. But beneath the fertile soil, something else took root. Not crops, not faith, something older, hungrier, and bound in blood. Children began disappearing in the summer heat. First a farmhand's daughter, last seen trailing ribbons into the cornfield. Then a merchant's son, dragged from his bed in the dead of night. Each disappearance left no body, no blood, no sign of struggle, only silence, broken by the murmurs of parents who swore they saw pale figures in the fields at dusk. The whispers grew darker. The figures were girls. 4 of them, always together, moving like shadows stitched at the seams. Their faces were familiar. The daughters of the Herrmann family, a devout line of farmers who sat in the front pew of the Lutheran church every Sunday. But something was wrong in the way they stood, the way their eyes lingered, the way their voices seemed to repeat each other, as if not entirely human. And then came the first grave, a shallow pit near the Conestoga River. Inside was the missing farmhand's daughter, her lips sewn shut with red thread. Carved into her chest was a symbol none could recognize, though the oldest men in town swore it resembled markings from the Hessian Wars 50 years earlier. Marks of oaths, blood, and betrayal. The community wanted answers. The church wanted silence, and the Herrmann sisters only smiled. The Herrmann family lived on the edge of Lancaster County, their land framed by black walnut trees that locals swore never shed leaves, even in winter. Johann Herrmann, the father, was a stern German immigrant whose strict hand at home mirrored the rigidity of the pulpit he stood beneath every Sunday. His wife, Dorothea, was quieter, her eyes always lowered, her hands always trembling, as though she carried a fear she could never speak aloud. But it was the daughters who drew stares, 4 girls, all born within 5 years of one another, Magdalene, Anna, Ruth, and Sophie. They did not laugh like other children. They did not run through the fields or chatter in the marketplace. They walked in unison, spoke rarely, and when they did, their voices carried the uncanny resemblance of one echoing another, as though some unseen conductor guided their speech. Neighbors said the Herrmann girls sang at night. Not hymns, but long, drawn-out notes that floated over the fields like a call. The tones were dissonant, layered, and uncomfortably precise, as though designed to summon rather than soothe. Livestock would stir restlessly in their pens when the singing began. Infants in their cribs would wake shrieking. The family dismissed the talk as superstition. But when the first child's body was found, sewn and carved, attention turned fully toward the farmhouse with the black walnut trees. People began asking questions. Who had taught the sisters their strange songs? Why did their mother never speak in church anymore? And why did every missing child last appear near the Herrmann land? Yet the sheriff hesitated. The pastor urged silence, because Lancaster needed its illusions of order, and no one dared name the daughters as murderers. Not yet. Autumn 1837. The harvest moon hung swollen, red, and low, casting the fields in a sickly light. It was on such a night that the second grave was found, a miller's boy 10 years old. Vanished while walking home with his father. The father swore he saw 4 figures standing at the tree line, motionless, watching. When he turned, the boy was gone. Search parties combed the cornfields and creek beds. They found nothing until a week later, when a hunter's dog unearthed a mound of disturbed earth near the Herrmann property line. The body lay contorted, limbs twisted as if broken after death. The boy's eyes had been removed, replaced by smooth river stones. Across his chest, carved deep, was the same alien sigil, an interlocking design of lines and circles, impossible to trace in one motion, like a knot without beginning or end. The town's physician, Dr. Reuben Callow, examined the corpse in secret. He told no one what he discovered, only that it was unnatural and not meant for the human body. His report to the sheriff vanished the next morning. Some claimed the church intervened. Others whispered that the sisters had gotten to him first. That same night, witnesses swore they saw Magdalene Herrmann wandering the riverbanks, humming under her breath, her white dress stained with something dark that the water never seemed to wash away. Still, no arrests were made, The sheriff claimed there was no evidence, but the silence was too heavy to be mere bureaucracy. It was protection, for the family, or for something older than the family. No one knew. What they did know was this: 2 children were dead. 2 graves were marked with symbols no one could decipher, and the Herrmann sisters were always near. By winter of 1837, the town could no longer ignore the sounds. The Herrmann sisters' nightly songs grew louder, carrying through the snow-laden air like dirges for the living. They sang not in German nor English, but in some half-forgotten tongue that made even the most devout men shudder. The notes climbed and collapsed, clashing in dissonance until animals screamed in their barns and church bells rattled without a hand to move them. Parents pressed their children's ears shut, whispering prayers as though against a storm. Yet the sound seeped through shutters, through walls, through the fragile fabric of faith itself. One night, a farmer swore he saw the sisters standing in a circle near the frozen creek. Their hands were clasped, their hair wild in the wind, their voices rising together into the darkness. He claimed the ice cracked beneath them without breaking, as though refusing to swallow them whole. His account spread like wildfire, yet when others went to see, the creek lay untouched, silent, pristine, except for faint markings carved in the ice, spiraling out like a labyrinth. The local pastor, Reverend Matthias Grimm, was called to investigate. He stood in the Herrmann pew that Sunday and declared the rumors baseless. "No evil lives among us," he said, "unless we bring it with our own fear." But the way his voice faltered on the word evil revealed what he truly believed. The choir of Lancaster, real children of flesh and bone, refused to sing in church that Christmas. Their throats ached, they claimed, as though something unseen had stolen their voices. The sisters, however, sat in the front pew, lips curled, as if smiling at a joke only they could hear. The 3rd grave appeared with a thaw. A girl of 11, daughter of a blacksmith, vanished during Lent. The town searched the woods, the river, the abandoned barns, but all roads led back, inevitably, to the Herrmann land. Her body was found in the orchard, buried shallow, as if the earth itself resisted swallowing her. Her skin was drained of all color, her veins blackened, her hair neatly braided as though someone had prepared her for a ceremony. Across her forehead was a new mark, not the familiar sigil of endless lines, but a crude cross turned upside down, burned into her flesh with a heated iron. This time the physician refused to touch her. The pastor prayed over the body, but the prayers curdled into silence before they reached the air. When the coffin was lowered, the ground trembled, and many swore they heard laughter, faint girlish laughter, from beneath the soil. That same week, the Herrmann sisters stopped attending church. The pastor claimed they were ill. Others said they were forbidden from entering holy ground. Whatever the truth, their absence deepened the terror. Because if they did not come to the church, then where did they gather? And who or what listened to their songs? 3 graves now, 3 families ruined, and still the sheriff wrote no warrant, no charges, no justice. He stopped looking people in the eye altogether. The town understood then. Something larger than law, larger than church, larger than Lancaster itself, was shielding the Herrmann sisters. But why? Reverend Matthias Grimm was not a coward, though he had the eyes of one haunted by knowledge too heavy to bear. In the spring of 1837, when the 3rd grave still seeped into the soil, Grimm began locking himself inside the rectory late into the night. Parishioners reported strange noises, scraping, muttering, the sound of a man speaking 2 voices at once. One night, a farmer delivering grain claimed to glimpse through the rectory window. The pastor was bent over his desk, copying the same symbol carved into the children's bodies again and again, filling pages until his hands bled. By dawn, Grimm denied everything. "I study scripture only," he said, but his Bible was never seen again. Instead, he carried a leather-bound book with no title, its pages swollen with dampness, as though rescued from a river long ago. Whispers spread that Grimm had served as a chaplain during the last years of the Hessian War, that he had seen symbols like these before, etched into men who had sworn secret pacts on battlefields, soaked with blood. Some said the Herrmann family descended from such soldiers, men who carried their oaths across oceans, into farms, into pews, into their daughters. When pressed to speak, Grimm grew pale, "Do not ask me." He told one parishioner, "Ask the trees, they remember more than I do." From that week on, the walnut grove by the Herrmann farmhouse was avoided at all costs. Not because of wolves, not because of witches, but because of memory itself, memory that refused to die. Sheriff Elias Brandt was a man known for his iron sense of duty. He had broken smuggling rings, tracked fugitives across rivers, and quelled riots with a shotgun at his hip. But when it came to the Herrmann sisters, he did nothing. Parents begged him to act. Mothers clutched his coat, sobbing, demanding the arrests that everyone knew should have come months ago. Yet Brandt remained still, his jaw clenched, his eyes fixed somewhere far beyond the people in front of him. "Without proof I cannot condemn," he repeated like scripture, but the townsfolk noticed his sudden wealth. The sheriff's barn was repaired with fresh timber. His wife wore new lace imported from Philadelphia. Rumor claimed envelopes arrived at his home, hand-delivered by Johann Herrmann under cover of night. Worse, some swore they saw the sheriff himself outside the Herrmann farmhouse, standing silent in the walnut grove as the sisters sang their unholy songs. He did not stop them. He did not even move. He stood like a man entranced or enslaved. A group of fathers attempted to confront him in the tavern, threatening to form a vigilante mob if he refused again. Brandt's response chilled them. "Do it, and you'll find yourselves in the ground beside your children." The meaning was clear. To oppose the sisters was to invite death, and the sheriff himself would ensure it. Thus, Lancaster County learned its darkest truth. Law did not protect them. Law was already claimed. By midsummer, Lancaster County lived in a constant state of dread. Children were not allowed beyond the fences. Windows were shuttered before dusk. Yet no lock, no bolt, no prayer felt strong enough to resist the pull of the Herrmann sisters. Their presence infected everything. Crops blackened overnight in fields that touched their land. Wells turned brackish. Horses screamed at unseen terrors and refused to move past the walnut grove. The air itself seemed heavier, as though each breath carried the taste of damp earth and rot. Still, no one dared confront the Herrmann family. When Dorothea Herrmann passed through the marketplace, people bowed their heads, afraid to meet her eyes. The daughters rarely appeared in public now, but when they did, they walked barefoot, their dresses dragging in the dirt, their hair braided into identical knots, always together, always watching. It was then that the sisters began leaving tokens on doorsteps. A braid of hair tied with river reeds, a doll carved from walnut wood, a ribbon stained dark with something unidentifiable. The families who found such gifts knew what it meant. Their child would be next. And indeed, the next disappearance followed. A boy of 12, son of the town's own physician, vanished on a clear night with no trace of struggle. His father's screams were said to carry for miles, yet the town did not search. They already knew where he had gone. They already knew where he would be found. The boy's body was discovered 3 days later in the walnut grove itself. The first time the sisters had chosen not to hide their crime. He was nailed upright against a tree, his chest carved with the familiar sigil, his mouth packed full of dirt as though silenced by the earth itself. But this grave bore something new. Around him, carved deep into the bark of the trees, were words in German no one dared translate. Reverend Grimm, when forced to look, whispered only, "This is not for us." This was written for something else. The sisters were seen nearby, their hands stained, their dresses torn, yet no one touched them. The sheriff claimed jurisdiction ended at the grove. The pastor claimed prayer could not cross its threshold. So the town buried the physician's son quietly, without him, without Belle, the fourth grave. 4 children, 4 deaths, 4 Herrmann daughters. The pattern was complete, but what terrified Lancaster most was not the murders themselves. It was the sense that the killings were only the beginning. That the graves were not endings, but offerings, and whatever had been promised in blood had not yet arrived. After the 4th grave, Reverend Grimm disappeared from the pulpit. For 3 weeks, no sermons filled the church. The pews grew dusty, and parishioners whispered that the reverend had been claimed by the same force he once tried to condemn. Then one night, a young altar boy claimed he saw Grimm in the cemetery, kneeling by the children's graves. In his hands was the leather-bound volume he had guarded so desperately. The boy swore he watched the reverend open the book, not to words, but to pages filled with sketches of the same sigils carved into the children's flesh. Circles within circles, crosses bent into impossible angles, diagrams of bodies dissected, rearranged, marked with lines of power like maps of veins. The boy told no one for days, but when he finally confessed, the truth spread quickly. Reverend Grimm's book was not a Bible. It was a record of something older, something imported, perhaps stolen, from the Hessian soldiers who once marched through Pennsylvania soil with their strange rites and darker allegiances. The townsfolk began to connect the dots. Johann Herrmann had been a boy during those wars, son of a soldier who never returned. Perhaps the oaths of those men had not died in the fields of Trenton and Brandywine. Perhaps they had seeded themselves in families, in bloodlines, in children not entirely born of this world. And perhaps the Herrmann daughters were the harvest of such oaths. Lancaster's hidden shame stretched deeper still. A merchant's widow, desperate to protect her own sons, confessed what she knew of the Herrmann family's past. Years earlier, Dorothea Herrmann had not birthed all 4 girls herself, 2 of them. No, one was sure, which had been brought from the county orphanage in 1825. Records of the adoption had been sealed by the sheriff himself, signed not only by Johann Herrmann, but also by Reverend Grimm. The widow swore she once worked as a servant at that orphanage and had seen strange arrivals. Infants delivered in the dead of night, nameless, unbaptized, their origins never spoken of. The orphanage had burned down in 1830, destroying most records. But rumors persisted that the institution had been a place of quiet experiments, children taken, exchanged, and corrected under the guise of charity. Some whispered that the Herrmann girls were not sisters at all, but a blending of bloodlines, selected for some design neither holy nor human. The widow's testimony was dismissed, but the seed of suspicion spread. What was the orphanage hiding? Why had the church sanctioned the Herrmann adoptions? And what, exactly, had the sheriff been paid to keep silent about? If the sisters were not born of Lancaster, then whose daughters were they? The black walnut grove had always stood apart from the farmland, a cluster of dark trees that locals swore predated settlement. Old stories claimed the land was once used by Lenape tribes for rituals, a place where the earth was thin and voices could be heard beneath the soil. But when the Germans arrived, the grove was quickly claimed, fenced, and renamed Herrmann land. Farmers noticed something unnatural about the trees. They never shed fully in winter. Their sap bled darker than any other wood, and birds avoided nesting in their branches. Some nights, if one stood close enough, the trunks seemed to whisper, not like the creak of wood, but like voices pressed through closed mouths. It was here that every one of the children's graves had been found, circling the grove like offerings at its roots. Here the sisters sang their dissonant songs, as though trying to stir whatever slept in the dark beneath the trees. An elderly stonemason, recalling the Hessian wars, confessed he had once seen such groves marked by soldiers. Not planted, he said, but summoned, saplings grown on blood, watered with fear. He warned the townsfolk that cutting the trees would not end their power, only awaken what lay waiting, and so the walnut grove remained. A mouth that never opened, yet consumed all the same. By late 1837, whispers hardened into truth. Lancaster County had struck a bargain. The sheriff, the pastor, and a handful of powerful families had bound themselves to silence in exchange for prosperity. It was said that as long as the Herrmann daughters were allowed their offerings, the land would remain fertile, the harvests abundant, and the town protected from war and plague. Those who dared to break the pact would face ruin, and not by the sisters alone, but by the earth itself. Old ledgers confirmed the suspicion, taxes forgiven, crops mysteriously flourishing on Herrmann fields when others failed, and payment, always discreet, always unspoken, flowing from merchant guilds into the sheriff's hands. The sisters were not killers by whim, they were instruments. Their crimes were rituals demanded by a covenant older than memory. 4 children for 4 sisters, 4 graves to renew a cycle that must not break. But cycles require participants. The town had chosen silence, and silence by then was indistinguishable from consent. In 1902, decades after the Herrmann farmhouse was abandoned, a group of renovators discovered something hidden behind a rotted beam. A folded paper, stiff with age, sealed with wax. The handwriting was delicate, almost childish, yet the words were sharp as knives. It read, "They tell us not to speak, but we are never silent. We hear the roots. We hear the breath beneath the soil. When we sleep, our mouths keep moving. When we wake, we are not sure which of us is speaking. Sometimes it is not us at all. Sometimes it is the one we serve." The letter was unsigned, but the renovators swore they felt 4 voices pressing into their ears as they read aloud, layered and indistinguishable, until the words themselves began to blur. One of the men fell ill shortly after, his lungs filling with fluid that no physician could drain. He drowned in his own body within weeks. The letter was confiscated by the county records office. It has never been seen again. But the men who touched it were buried in shallow graves of their own, as if the pact reached forward through time, punishing anyone who tried to open the wound of Lancaster's past. Among the rare testimonies preserved from 1837, one name recurs: Magdalene Herrmann, the eldest sister. Witnesses described her as the only one who occasionally broke formation, stepping ahead of the others, her gaze fixed on whoever dared meet her eyes. A seamstress, summoned once to repair the sisters' dresses, later confessed she heard Magdalene whisper as she worked, "Do you wonder why we do it? Do you think it is our choice? It is older than us, older than you. We open the earth because it is hungry, and it will eat whether we feed it or not." The seamstress fled the farmhouse and never returned. Days later, her own child sickened and died, though no wound, no mark, no sigil was ever found. Magdalene had been right. The hunger did not confine itself to offerings. It lingered in the air, a debt-seeking payment. The sisters were only the collectors, and in her voice, calm, resigned, certain there was no plea for mercy, only inevitability. The winter after the 4th grave was unlike any the county had endured. Snow fell blackened as though carrying soot from unseen fires. Crops withered beneath the frost, barns collapsed under the weight of ice, and a sickness crept through the households of Lancaster. It began with fevers that no herb could cool. Then came coughing, violent, tearing, wet. Entire families weakened overnight. Those who survived claimed they saw pale figures standing outside their windows, 4 at a time, watching, waiting. The sisters were blamed, of course. But no one dared approach their farmhouse, even when lights burned in the windows all night, even when strange screams echoed from the walnut grove. The sheriff ordered the townsfolk to remain indoors. "We are protected," he insisted. "This is not their doing." But the protection had broken. The pact, for reasons no one could explain, was unraveling. The graves were not enough. The hunger was spreading. By spring, 24 graves lined the churchyard. None bore sigils, none bore carvings, but each death carried the same stench of inevitability. The sisters had begun something that could not be ended. And still the grove stood untouched, black against the snow, whispering louder than ever. Desperation pushed the townsfolk to act. One night, a secret gathering was held in a barn on the outskirts of town. Farmers, widows, blacksmiths, ordinary people who had lost too much met in silence, lit only by lanterns. They whispered of revolt. Some wanted to burn the Herrmann farmhouse, to drag the sisters into the square and end it themselves. Others warned that blood would only deepen the curse, cut out the roots. One man argued, "Salt the grove." But an old woman, blind, half-mad, once a midwife, spoke above them all. "You fools, you let them feed the earth for too long. Burn the sisters, and you will only wake what sleeps beneath their feet." The barn fell silent. And then, outside, a sound rose into the night. The sisters singing, 4 voices, clear as bells, as if mocking the very gathering that sought to end them. When the lanterns were doused, the men found strange marks burned into the wood of the barn. Circles, crosses, lines drawn without flame. As though something had been listening and had already answered. The revolt dissolved before it began. Fear proved stronger than fire. By autumn of 1838, the Herrmann farmhouse stood silent. No smoke rose from its chimney. No lights burned in its windows. The walnut grove, once alive with whispers, fell still. The sisters were gone. Some said they fled west into Ohio, where new settlements would not know their names. Others swore they had been swallowed by the grove itself, taken into the roots as payment for debts paid in children's blood. But the truth was stranger still. A hunter, lost in the woods, stumbled upon the farmhouse weeks later. Inside, he found 4 dresses folded neatly on the table, each tied with a braid of hair. Upstairs, the beds were untouched, as though no one had slept in them for months. And on the wall, scratched deep into the plaster, was a message: "We are not gone. We are beneath you." The hunter told no one until years later, when age loosened his fear. By then, Lancaster had already buried the story. Reverend Grimm returned to the pulpit that winter with hollow eyes and trembling hands. He declared that the troubles of Lancaster were over, that the town had been tested and found worthy. He never spoke of the sisters again. The sheriff burned what records remained: death reports, testimonies, ledgers. The orphanage fire was blamed on accident, though the ashes hid more than timber. Families who dared to speak were silenced with coin or with threats. Some simply vanished, their homes left to rot in the fields. By 1840, Lancaster was restored to quiet order. Crops grew again, children laughed in the streets. The graves of the lost were overgrown, their names forgotten, their stories erased. But the silence was not peace. It was concealment, a wound stitched shut, festering beneath the scar, and the walnut grove still stood, dark against the horizon, untouched by axe or fire. A monument not to faith nor to family, but to a pact never broken, only delayed. Today, Lancaster County wears a mask of pastoral calm. Fields stretch golden in the sun, church bells ring on Sundays, and families walk the same roads once stained with blood. Nothing remains, they say, of the Herrmann sisters. Nothing remains of 1837, but if you look closely, the past is not erased. The walnut grove still stands, its trunks older, thicker, but never broken. No saw can cut its wood clean. Its roots resist the plow. Children dare each other to enter, but none linger long. They swear they hear whispers, like 4 voices speaking at once, calling their names. In the county archives, the years between 1837 and 1840 are strangely thin. Birth records missing, death registers incomplete, church ledgers with entire pages torn out. Officials explain it away as fire, as carelessness, as time, but the gaps align too perfectly, like wounds deliberately sutured. And yet, scraps remain: a burned letter here, a rumor of Hessian bloodlines there, a physician's diary with 4 pages torn, 4 stains left behind, always 4, always the pattern. The story of the Herrmann sisters was not forgotten by accident. It was buried, hidden, protected by the very institutions sworn to record truth, because if the world remembered what Lancaster once allowed, 4 sisters, 4 graves, 4 crimes that were never punished, then others might begin to ask what else sleeps beneath their own soil. The pact was never broken, only deferred, and some nights, when the wind rises through the walnut grove, those who live nearby swear the singing returns. 4 voices, layered, precise, echoing across the dark fields. Not gone, not forgiven, only waiting,